know if I have a question so much, but I was sitting in my car reading the neighborhood newspaper, and I saw the article for this. And I'm the type of person, if something needs attention, I give it attention right away. I don't have to go on no 40-day fast. I don't have to speak in tongues. Okay. But as I shared with this gentleman, I never will forget. I go to a lot of meetings, and I'm so tired of starting stuff. The devil does not care what you start as long as you don't finish. Who's that said? The race goes to the swift, the one who finishes. Okay, and I ain't gonna take up no offering. But there's a gentleman by the name of Leroy Duncan, 25th CAPS facilitator. And I never will forget what he said a community consists of. It consists of churches, residents, schools, nonprofits, and for-profits. I am a seasoned citizen. I refuse to use the word senior. And the flavor is spicy, thank you very much. And I have lived on the west side of Chicago for 32 years, and that is also my spiritual age. And what I want to say is, last and not least, I've had this book for a while. It's entitled, Lord, Teach Me How to Love by Creflo Dollar. And now since I've had a teenager, I've had to start back in my house. It's good to go to meetings and stuff, but I want peace in my house. And the only person that really know if you're a Christian or not is the people that live with you. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to read another quote. This one because one of the elements of classical education is a priority on aesthetics. And on the question of aesthetics, it becomes even more complicated. So I want to read a quote from Toni Morrison's book, The Bluest Eye, and just hopefully I can sort of formulate a question, but I just want us to kind of think about this together. So this is a quote speaking about the main character. She's an 8-year-old girl. She was never able, after her education in the movies, to look at a face and not assign it some category in the scale of absolute beauty. And the scale was one she absorbed in full from the silver screen. Here was an ugly little girl asking for beauty. A little black girl who wanted to rise up out of the pit of her blackness and see the world with blue eyes. His outrage grew and fell like power. For the first time, he honestly wished he could work miracles. How do we think about cultural conceptions of beauty and the dignity of every person made in the image of God, and training children to love what is beautiful, while also recognizing so much of what we think of as beautiful is what we see in the mirror? This is a kind of, in some ways, self-justifying in just a new dimension.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting. I have not read that book in years, but it is such a, I mean, just hearing that passage again brings me back to that little girl. And definitely in our society, beauty is seen as good, still to this day, as being often white or living in a certain place or speaking a certain way. And one thing that I've realized as I've worked with young people from very little ages, and I have my own 3 children, my son is sitting or leaning in the front row, all the way through young adulthood, is if you don't love yourself, if you don't affirm your own identity and your own greatness, it actually is hard to be your greatest self. And one thing that I've realized in education, and I always try to be very careful with how I talk about this, but often we can be so deficit-based about what students and children and families and communities do not have, that we don't look at the assets in those communities. So I often realize, even when I talk about the communities in which I grew up in, I talk about the games of double dutch that I played and the friendships that I had and my family that still lives there, before I actually say, especially in Chicago, where I happen to grow up. because I know that often there's an assumption made about people who are living in certain places, and I think that absolutely gets passed on to children. And I think it actually follows them into adulthood, where when I think about at least the academic achievement gap, often there's also a belief gap, a belief in what you actually believe is possible for yourself because of what others are saying to you. And so when I think about that little girl, but when I think about the number of children and young adults that I've worked with over time, one of the things that I realized, and I feel like we've heard this from a couple other panelists, is really important, is for us to understand that there is beauty in everyone, there is talent in everyone, and actually it really is not even good for anyone, including the country, for everyone to want to be the same way. Whether it's diversity in terms of our schools or diversities in terms of the workplace. I mean, basically this nation, some people were brought here and taken from their original countries. Some people have immigrated here, but we are a nation, and the strength of this nation is actually because of its diversity. But I definitely think with young children especially, it is so important to affirm who they are and why they're beautiful the way that they were born.
Yeah.
I have a lot going on, but there's some philosophers that talk about beauty as on a circle rather than a continuum. And they say very tritely that pretty is right next to ugly on that circle. Because if it goes around, like if pretty is 1, then ugly is 12, and it depends on where you are. But there's also another part of this idea of beauty that Cornel West really talks about. He's talking about the funk of something. And I started thinking about it just right now. Like, for example, all right, there's a basketball game going on over there, right? Isn't it beautiful to watch children or athletes perform at a high level? And doesn't it stink afterwards, right? And so there is beauty and funk right there together. And in fact, you know, the flowers that we have that are sprouting around our city are part and parcel because there is some manure mixed in that helps them grow. Some leftover residue, some leftover nutrients that the animal could not digest is now serving as a food source to these beautiful elements. And so I definitely agree with when we think about the beauty of children, the beauty of a space, even the beauty of this space. I live in West Pullman, and we have this, you know, magnificent Croc Center over there. I don't know if anyone's been there yet, but it's fantastic. But I like this place too, because when I walked in, it brought me back immediately to my childhood, growing up in Milwaukee and entering community centers that reminded me of this. And so some people will say, "Oh, this is old," but old isn't ugly, or new isn't pretty. You know, but I think the conversation has to be so how do you say, complicated and so multi-layered. Lastly, I intentionally wear mohawks. Like, it's a conscious decision to do it. And if I was not in a bow tie and a suit and I dressed in my regular street clothes, I could play a teenager on TV probably, you know. But in some schools in this country, this is a forbidden haircut, a hairstyle. Little girls in braids are not allowed to wear them, or locks. And this is the same issue with this idea of beauty, conforming. And so, you know, and mostly that's white good doers or do-gooders. I don't know what do-gooders, trying to help a child conform and acclimate so they can be more successful, rather than allowing them to learn to celebrate themselves, so that when they do enter these spaces that are oftentimes predominantly white, predominantly influential, that they don't question themselves, they don't doubt themselves, but they can stand flat-footed and challenge somebody and be okay with that. Make eye contact and don't look down. And so as it pertains to this idea of a classical school, I would challenge those who are thinking about it to look at what part of it will be funky, what part of it will be like, man, that's cool, because we put in some good work and that funk helped us move some along a little, and that's a neat concept. And I didn't understand that. What is the study of beauty? There's a philosophy term for that, but anyhow, that's something we ought to really wrestle with, struggle with. and not get caught up with these arbitrational lines.
Just anecdotally, I'll tell you, my kids attended a school here in the city, in grammar school, that was started largely by Dutch people, and the school had become very diverse. And I remember at the Christmas play, a couple of years in a row, the classically trained person who led the Christmas play started the Christmas play by saying, "In order to honor God, we'll hold all applause until the end of the program." And most of the audience was not white. More than of the parents who'd showed up, these were not. I just thought, first of all, that's not going to work.
God is about to be disrespected.
Right, exactly. Praise God, he's about to be disrespected. No, there's that's the problem, right? Like there was and I don't blame the guy, but there was an ignorance there. There was a lack of recognition to where his cultural norm had become the standard of what was good and beautiful. And I don't know if you've ever been in a room when a bunch of kids do a great Christmas play, but the parents celebrate those kids. This is a beautiful thing. It might not be my cultural norm, but it's a beautiful thing. And in later years, more recently, they hired a friend of mine who's an African-American pastor to take over the music production. And it was wild to see the contrast when the next year, the first song in the Christmas play was a rap Christmas song that resulted in all of the kids bounding through the congregation, rapping about baby Jesus. And I just, the room exploded. It was such a wonderful thing. Now, that's not to say that one cultural value is well, actually, it's to make that point. One cultural sensitivity about what's beautiful and good is not better or worse, but it is different. And we do, in that sense, reflect God in some of the normal things that we declare are good in very different ways. The Presbyterian church that I spent many years in as an adult, the standard of beauty was total silence in the congregation. And there's something that can be celebrated about that. There's something that I still find comforting in that. But at the Black Baptist church that we became members of, the standard of beauty was the shouting and the welcoming and the embracing, and just something viscerally different, right? And both of them, I would just say, glorify God.
Let's take a few more questions.